I teach mathematics to first year biology students. There are typically about 140 in my class, so that's a relatively large amount. I have noticed that especially since COVID, it is more difficult to get students to come to the university. So that is one challenge, because to motivate them, to engage them, it helps a lot if they're there. And of course it's a big group, so it is difficult to keep them all on board. And then typically for biology students, well, mathematics is typically not their favorite topic. There's always a few that do really like it, but there's also always a few that don't really like it. And there's a big difference in background level of the mathematics that they had in secondary school. Yeah, it's difficult because of course all the students have to pass in the end the same exam, but you don't want the ones that have had a significant level of mathematics already to be bored, that they have the feeling that they learned nothing new. Whereas it cannot be so complicated for the students that didn't have a lot of mathematics or don't have a lot of background, that it's undoable for them. So that's a balance you have to strike. What I do is I work with a basic program that is catered towards, I would say, Dutch students that do their final exam in what we call Math B. So that's mostly calculus in the Netherlands. And they're kind of at the level where they're good at integration. They have some experience with where they're good with differentiation. They have some experience with integration. So we start the course with kind of 4 weeks of, I'd say, repetition of that. So that is basic skills, also working with e-notations of scientific numbers, doing some chemical calculation, these kind of things, working with exponents, logarithms, these kind of applications, and then integration and differentiation. So you could say the first half of the course is a quick rehearsal of their final exam. For whom that is new, that is difficult, but with some extra tutoring, that is doable. For the ones who've had Math B in high school, sometimes it's good to repeat. Not everyone goes straight from high school to university, so for them it's also not always bad to have a kind of refreshment of this. Yeah, for the ones that are very advanced, this is a little bit more. And then the next, I'd say, half of the course, we go into differential equations. We apply it mostly to growth models, so exponential growth, logistic growth, these kind of things. So we apply it always to biological examples. And this is then, for most students, this is really new material. So that is, we go a bit slower there. I'd say it's even technically maybe even easier, but conceptually it's more difficult for a lot of them. So yeah, they get the time to get used to this. And then for the students that can use an extra challenge, we have some extra materials. So we have some extra material on complex numbers. And I also, I do not really do oscillations, sinusoids, these kind of things. I put these as extra material. So for the students that want an extra challenge, they can do this. And then they get a bonus question on the exam. So they can get some extra points. I mean, of course, they cannot get more than the maximum number, but they can get some extra points for these bonus materials. So I used to do really lectures before. Fortunately, they were recorded, because during COVID, of course, I couldn't lecture anymore, and then I still had the video recordings. And then I also realized that, this kind of old-fashioned getting in front of a classroom and telling the same story every year is not the most effective way of teaching. So what I did is I took these lectures and I cut them up in little knowledge clips, so really about one topic. Also, over the COVID years, I had quite some recorded explanations of questions that I explain, like on a whiteboard, on a screen, by hand. I really explain these questions. So I have by now a pretty big collection of video materials that I put online for the students, and I tell them that they can use this as self-study, as well as the theories and exercises that are in Sowiso. So when they come to the classroom, it is either to meet with the tutor for extra explanations, or they work in Sowiso in groups in the computer hall, where we walk around. So we don't have a computer room that is big enough for 140 students. So they're divided in three rooms with several teachers for each room, where we walk around and we help them. And then they have to do a diagnostic test every week. So they have multiple attempts. They do have to get 75% correct, but they can do it multiple times until they really do it. And that is also for us a way to keep track of them. I've done it now a few years like this. Like, of course, during COVID, we couldn't do it any other way. I think it's very doable for the students now. They, if I look at the average grade of the exam, they do well. They do the weekly test. They keep on practicing so they don't, cram at the end. But you miss a little bit the excitement. So the fact that they just sit there studying themselves, doing these exercises, it makes it also a little bit boring. You kind of miss the opportunity to really convey the enthusiasm and the excitement of research. That is the funny thing is that I've noticed that there's a huge difference between students. So there are students that really say, like, don't bother me with all these stories, just let me do the exercises and leave me alone. And there are students that really need or want this application of, like, why am I studying this? What can I use it for? What is a real world application? I do provide examples for I'd say almost all material where we have, and this is biology, but it's general biology, right? So we have examples from, like I said, from the modeling of disease spreading, but we have also examples from neuroscience. We have this examples from interacting predators and prey and populations of animals. We have algae growth on little ponds. We have also some medical examples, so how are drugs taken up in the blood. So I try, again, with every topic, I try to make one or two examples like this. I must say that in practice, the real world examples tend to be more difficult or less clean than the exercises, right? In the exercises, you can always make everything fit nicely and stuff. And especially if you want to fit something or have something that really looks like something from a newspaper, then things tend to get a little bit less clean and therefore also a little bit more difficult. So I do try to collect these kind of real world examples, and these are then not always from biology, that are also just a little bit funny. So you have, for instance, sometimes I find them on Twitter from colleagues, sometimes I see them myself in the newspaper. I also saw that also in the students that I supervised more on internships, there was a huge difference. So there were students that are really, really impacted mentally and students that were less so. I don't know if this is a personal difference or more. Also, sometimes there are situations, for instance, I noticed that I had one student that was living in a student house. Must say that I did, because it can also be, if you have just lost someone to COVID, then it might be a painful thing. So I did tell them explicitly, like, listen, I put these examples here because I think they might be interesting for you, but if it's too painful, then it's also okay to skip them. Because I think, for these kind of examples, it can also be it could also be very painful in theory. I think if you really apply mathematics to real life examples, you have to be careful that you don't get lost in the details. I think that's because, like I said, I mean, the reality is often so much more dirty than the clean examples you get in standard textbooks. But that can also mean that for students, it becomes so complicated that they actually don't get the main point anymore. So and I think this is actually the art of modeling in general, is that ideally an example or a model is simplified or abstract enough that it helps you understand something about the world that you otherwise couldn't understand from, for instance, an experiment. But because if it becomes so complicated that you know, that you don't understand what your exercise or your model does anymore, then it's better to just do an experiment. But of course, it shouldn't be so simplified that it has nothing to do with reality anymore. So there's a balance between simplifying enough that it really, you know, shows something and becomes insightful, but not simplifying so much that it has that it has no relation with reality anymore. And that is a delicate balance. Yeah, I'm thinking so. Of course, over the years, you do know. For instance, I know every year that they find that the weeks about integration very difficult. So over the years, you gain a bit of a feeling about what topics they find difficult, and then you can, of course, together with the tutor, take that into consideration. So, for instance, give them some extra time for these topics. You do notice a difference. Like there's also a lot of students that just do it, and then there's the few that are really motivated by it, that they really like this kind of material. I think with a diverse group of students, you just have to cater to all of them, and I think it's so you have to do both. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's fair enough that there are students that just say, okay, I understand the principle, I want to practice with this, and then I don't want to read long stories all the time. I just want to practice with this concept. And then it's also good that they see it applied to a real world example. So I don't think that there's an either or there. I think you have to do both. Well, mathematics is of course also a topic that well traditionally doesn't have a lot of gender balance, and other and I think there's um, a big bias that you have to be some kind of genius to understand maths. Well, I mean, there's one thing to become a professor in pure maths, but to do the kind of mathematics that you need for biology or biological modeling, I think a lot of us can learn it. Just putting the hours in and you get used to things. So the first time you do an exercise or the first time you learn a new concept, it sounds really abstract and weird and your head doesn't quite get it. And then after a few hours of working with it and making some exercises and then maybe a night's sleep and then doing it again, then all of a sudden you realize you got used to it and it's actually okay. So I would really love it if we could stop having this kind of you have to be a genius for mathematics idea and just no, it's something you can learn and you can by practicing you can learn it. And a lot, I'd say almost all of us can learn it.